Hi friends, Mindy here. I have a process video for you today. I'm going to be setting up my journal to work through the new kit, Tetelestai from bythewell4god. I have decided this month to create like a junk style journal, and I will also be working in the little pocket journaling Bible. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is create my cover. So I have this chipboard in my stash and I wanted to go ahead and use it. So I'm going to trim this down. My finished book is going to be roughly 6.5 inches tall by about 5 inches wide, and then it's going to have an 1.5 inch spine. In hindsight, I probably could have made the spine just a little bit smaller, but I wanted to give myself a little bit of space for my journal to grow. Just after having read through the devotional already, I can tell there's going to be a lot of notes and things that I want. So this book has kind of the potential to get really thick. So I have cut down all of my chipboard pieces there, and now I have the fabric that you could get to coordinate with the kit. And these are roughly 10 by 12, I think. And so I'm cutting this just directly in half. This will cover basically the front cover and the back, and then I will use the other piece that came with it to wrap around the spine, because I don't have quite enough fabric to be able to do that in one piece. So I'm having to kind of do it in 3 separate sections. So I'm just trimming these down just a little bit to make them a little bit easier to work with and to wrap. So I have the floral pieces that will be here for the front and back covers, and then I want to create the spine section here. So I want to make sure that I have enough space that this green piece is going to cover from the front cover around to the spine and to the back cover. And I wanted sort of that rough raw edge of the fabric, so I just used my scissors to cut a little slit, and then I tore the fabric to about the size that I wanted. And then to get the height right, I'm just measuring it up against the other piece of fabric, and I'm just going to trim that down. I'm working on a self-healing mat with my Tim Holtz ruler that has the metal side, and just using that to trim everything down. So I will be adhering this fabric with some heat and bond. I've done this before on my channel. If you have seen it in my other videos, this is a great way to add fabric to chipboard, so you don't have like liquid glue seeping through and all that kind of stuff. It's a really easy way to do it. I really like doing it. So what I'm doing here is I'm just cutting the heat and bond down to about the same size as my fabric pieces. So I have my nonstick craft sheet down, and then I have a piece of cardboard over that just to kind of catch all of the adhesive, because my heat and bond paper is just a little bit bigger than my fabric in some places. I did that on purpose so that I would make sure that I have adhesive all the way to the edges of all of my fabric pieces. So this is just a little craft iron. You could use your regular iron if you want. Just make sure it's on a dry setting with no steam, and pretty low actually. And it only takes a couple of seconds, and the heat and bond is now on the back of my fabric here. So I'm going to do that with the other 2 pieces, the floral pieces. You can see here a little bit of that heat and bond got off of the edge there, and you can just, once that's cool, you can just trim that down with your scissors. You want to make sure to do that because you don't want that to get onto your iron. So this is essentially how this is going to work. My little spine piece is going to be on the green part, and then I have my 2 cover pieces like this. So I'm going to work on wrapping this. So I'm kind of justifying this on the right side there, so it's all lined up on the right, and then I have the excess over on the left, and that's going to allow me to wrap it. And I am cutting a couple little notches here around 2 of these corners. That's just going to make sure that I can get a really nice clean edge. It takes out some of the bulk from the fabric, and it gives you a really nice like mitered corner look. And now most of that you won't end up seeing at the end because of the end papers that I will glue down, but it just helps to have just a really nice like sharp corner and everything. So I'm just going back over this fabric and with my little iron here, and now I'm just gluing everything down. So I glued the long side down first, and now I'm just going to do the top and the bottom. You can see it just makes a really nice corner doing that way. A little bit of the fabric was kind of over the edge, so I just trimmed that down. and then just doing this bottom piece. So this will be one of the sections of the cover, and I'm just going over it, making sure everything is nice and adhered down. And then I will do the same thing for the back piece. So those are my two cover pieces. And now I need to work on the part that's going to be the spine. And this part was a little bit tricky, or maybe I was just making it more complicated than it needed to be. But because I wanted to make sure that I had the same amount of fabric wrapping to the front as would be on the back, and to try to keep it as even as possible. So I pulled out my little self-healing mat here again because it's got that grid on it. And so I'm just going to try to line everything up as straight as I possibly can, without, going too overboard with measuring and whatever. So what I'm basically doing is I have taken this fabric piece and I am making a mark roughly in the center of that piece, and then I'm going to make a mark also in the center of my little spine piece. That way I can make sure that this piece of chipboard for the spine gets put directly in the center of this fabric piece. And here I'm just going to kind of wrap this around so that I can hold everything in place. I'm going to take my iron just for a second here, and I'm really doing this just so that this piece doesn't keep moving it around, and that will allow me to give me the time that I need to get the rest of the cover in place. So whenever you're doing a book that has the 3 separate pieces for the spine, you have the 2 cover pieces and then the spine separate. In order to make sure that your spine or that your book closes easily, you want to make sure to give yourself a little bit of a gap between the spine piece and the covers. And a general rule of thumb there is that you want that space to be as wide as your cover. So whatever width of my chipboard is, that's how wide that little gap needs to be. And that just makes sure that everything will close really neat. Your book won't want to kind of alligator open on its own. It just it won't pull open. So that's just a kind of good rule of thumb. So I just lined those pieces up and then went through the process again with my iron and adhered everything down. And at this point I decided I wanted a little bit more stability on the inside, so I am going to cut another piece of this green fabric. I went through the same process. I added the heat and bond, and now I'm just ironing this into place. This is not necessary, first of all, but it is going to give a nice finished look to the inside of my book here where I sew the signatures in. And also it's going to add a little bit of extra stability, like I said. So I have just went ahead and I'm ironing this down, and I'm using my ruler here to kind of push the fabric down in that little groove that was created. And it's just going to make a really good hinge piece. So once all that is done, I need to add my end papers in here. So I have a couple of the pages that this is the paper that coordinates with the kit that you can get, and I have covered the entire back of that with some score tape, or this is scrapbook.com's version, double-sided adhesive. It's a really, really sticky adhesive. And so what I do generally is I just only peel back about half of the release paper, and that gives me kind of little handles that I can hold to kind of position everything where I want it. And then once I'm sure I have it where I want it, then I can kind of gently press it down and then pull the release paper the rest of the way off. Just a little trick to kind of help you, because sometimes if you drop score tape, once it sticks, it's stuck. It's really sticky. So this is one of those things that I do to just kind of help myself to make sure I'm getting it exactly where I want. And then I just went over that with a bone folder, made sure everything was really good and adhered down. And I have my 2 signatures here that I created. I'll do a flip through at the end of what those signatures are made out of. There's different kinds of papers in there. And I am just going through here right now and making some marks on each of the signatures and also on the spine so that I can keep everything pretty well neat. I want my stitches on the outside of this book to be as neat as possible, as even as possible. So I'm just making some marks, and then I have pulled out my little foam board here that I use. You could use a book. You could use, if you have a book cradle or whatever, you could use an old foam book or really anything. I have just had this foam thing and it works perfect, so I've had it forever, and so that's what I use. You've probably seen me do this before. Anyway, I'm just punching my 3 holes here. I have one in the center, and then the other holes are about 3/4 of an inch from top and bottom. And then I'm going to, once I have those holes, I'm going to go through on the spine where I marked those lines, and I'm going to make a little mark for each of the holes for each of the signatures. That way I can punch those holes. It's just easier than trying to punch the holes when it's all as one piece, and this will also keep them so that they look nice and neat on the outside. So I went ahead and punched all of my holes, and now I'm going to sew them in. I'm using a waxed linen thread here and a 3-hole pamphlet stitch. I've done this before on my channel, and I actually kind of struggled with this today. I don't know, my papers kind of kept wanting to move around, and it was just really hard to keep everything together. I don't know, I was just having a rough day. But anyway, so I'm going from the inside of the signature to the outside of the spine from the middle hole, and then going up to the top hole and coming back into the center of the signature. And you can see I'm just really having to fiddle with this for some reason. It just didn't want to stay like aligned very well. So I'm having to kind of actually go through page by page and get everything onto my needle, which is, you know, it happens sometimes. So anyway, so then I went through from that top hole all the way down to the bottom and back out to the outside. And again, you can see I'm just having to fiddle with it for whatever reason. And then once I go to the outside, I'll go back into the middle hole and then come back into the center of the book. And I mention this every single time, but it's just kind of important. Whenever you're doing a pamphlet stitch and you come back in through that middle hole, just make sure you don't split your thread, because then you won't be able to pull your thread tight. So just always be careful when you're coming back in at the last part here, that you're not going up in between those threads. And so you can see I'm just pulling this through, and I actually end up using some pliers here. There was a lot of paper, a lot of thickness of paper, and the chipboard was just a little bit thicker than what I usually use. So I just had those pliers. Just helps me pull the needle through a little bit easier. So once I got that through, then I'm just going to tie a square knot here, making sure that there's one tail of each of the threads on opposite sides. So you're basically tying the knot around that long thread. And then I just trim this down roughly to about the same size as the stitches. So there's a little bit of extra length there. I could trim it down further, but or you could leave them long if you wanted to too. You could hang things, little charms and stuff from them if you wanted to. So I went ahead and did that for both signatures, and now I want to add this piece. This was the wood veneer piece that came as a freebie with the By the Well for God kit. If you were in the first, I think, 300 orders, they sent these out and as a little thank you. And so I'm just using some Helmar 450 quick dry adhesive here on the front cover to glue this down. I'm just kind of holding it in place here for a second, and I will actually come in with a couple little clamps just to hold this in place. I get asked about these little clips everywhere. I got them in my grocery store, so, and it was a long time ago. But anyway, I'm just going to flip through here the signatures. You can see I have some of the pattern paper from the kit, just some plain white paper. I have some craft paper, like scrapbooking paper, and then I also have a hymnal page in each one of the signatures. And that is pretty much my book. This is just kind of the start. I can add papers and different things as I go along, but that is essentially it for now. If you liked this video, I would appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and be watching for the next video showing how I covered the journaling Bible. Until next time, bye-bye.